Good afternoon, Saitlanders. How are you? We hope that you are well. I want to talk to you about something I find very, very funny. When I was, I suppose I was in standard 8 or 9, standard 9, my English teacher was a superstar. What a man. What a man. Terrifying. He used to throw bean bags with ironies in them, bean bags with ball bearings, steel ball bearings in them at people who didn't behave in his class, and he could lose his temper like something unbelievable. He was the only teacher who, if you were proposed to his class, you had a formal right to decline. So there was a process. Every year, this year you're going to be doing science with Mr. Fairman, drama with Miss Raw, whatever, and English with Mr. Bovey. You were allowed to, it was a well-known and understood thing. Don't worry about it. Come to the head of department's office and tell her that you don't want to be in his class. In my year, there were 2 girls that declined. And the English set work, or one of the set works for that year, was Othello. Othello is the story of a Roman general from, these blooming WhatsApp notifications. Sorry, guys. A Roman general from Africa who worked for the Kingdom of Venice, and he was elderly, but he fell in love with the daughter of one of the senators of Venice, when Venice was arguably the most influential place in the world, along with perhaps France, Britain, Spain, but Venice was Venice. Great power, very wealthy, hundreds of ships, and most important city-state when it came to trade. Venice in modern-day Italy. And so he eloped with this girl called Desdemona. He was much older, she was much younger. In order to spite him, somebody convinced him that she had betrayed him, that she'd been unfaithful. So he killed her, discovered that this guy, this worm tongue, if you like, had lied to him, and then he committed suicide. Very tragic story. And there's some very classic motifs and sayings and what have you that come out of Shakespeare's Othello. For instance, the beast with 2 backs. Not to be crass, but it's incredible English. Just unbelievable. And one of the others was overtly racist. So there was a lot of racism woven into the story, which is not to say that Shakespeare took this side or that side. He was telling a story, how it would have been, how people would have reacted, what the gossip would have been, what would have been the sentiments of the father, who would have been on Othello's side and who would not. Because he was a very highly respected, competent, capable general, much liked. And it's derived from another story. I don't know the name of it or the author, from years before. And the guy was supposed to be a Moor. Now, a Moor is somebody from the Maghreb. You get sub-Saharan Africa. In simple terms, sub-Saharan Africa. We all know sub-Saharan Africa. We've all heard that term 100,000 times. Then you get the Sahel. Then you get the Sahara. Then you get the Maghreb. So somebody from the northern coastline almost of Africa. Somebody from Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, perhaps Libya, perhaps Egypt, but particularly the first three countries. Particularly, but not only. Those are the Moorish people, the Maghrebi people. The North African Muslims who invaded Spain and Portugal and took over the Iberian Peninsula, as it's called, and who then invaded France, and they were beaten by Charles the Hammer, very famously 732 AD, I believe. Yeah. Charles Martel. And eventually pushed out. The Moors were pushed out of the Iberian Peninsula, out of Spain and Portugal. But by the 70s or the 80s, political correctness in Europe, particularly in Britain, Shakespeare being English and British, was such that there was a general horror about white men playing the role of Othello in movies or in plays. Now, there was no counter thing. So, for instance, now there's a huge amount of discussion about a black guy playing 007. And you remember Arsène Lupin, the French story that was dubbed to Afrikaans, that was featured on SABC or SREK as you prefer, TV1 in the 70s and early 80s. It was a white aristocrat, right? There's subsequently been a film and what have you in France, modern day version, played by a black guy. Hopelessly unrealistic reflection, but very politically correct. But it has become horrific, the suggestion that Othello could ever be played by a white man. He must be played by a black man. A black man. Black. And the irony is, well, there's already the irony of you can, but I can't, is that the Moors, as you may know if you live in Johannesburg and surrounds, and you have your hair cut, as we all do, by, well, we all have our hair cut, but if you have your hair cut by a Algerian or Moroccan barber, as there are so many in Johannesburg, you know that to say that they're black is not really, they've got those weird complexions that are paler than ours. You know, they're like alabaster, they're half see-through. You see through the first 5 millimeters of their skin. So it's the proposition of these black actors playing Othello is false. You know, black, as opposed to this sort of compromise, you know, the truthful compromise. Getting a Maghrebi actor to play a Maghrebi person, a Moor. A similar example is of this, we're coming to a point, is Nelson Mandela gave a famous speech in Carthage in North Africa in 1994. Now, Carthage lies in this the Maghrebi thing is purely coincidental. You'll understand that in a minute. Carthage lies on the southern coastline of the Mediterranean. It is the northernmost tip of Africa. And he gave a speech. In fact, I've got it open. Just let me find it. Sorry. It suddenly occurred to me that I could read you the speech. If I could only find it. Come on, Simon. Here we go. Okay. At the summit in Tunis, Tunis being the capital of Tunisia, we spoke about the symbolism of Carthage, that city which was destroyed by the Romans and must be rebuilt by Africans. Here in South Africa, we have no such spectacular monuments to ancient history. Why he said here in South Africa, I don't know. Oh, I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. My mistake. It was at a banquet for the president of Tunisia, but he's referring to when he was in Tunisia himself. Right, but he's giving the speech, Pretoria, Cape Town, Johannesburg. Here in South Africa, we have no such spectacular monuments to ancient history. But we have a nation that was torn apart by centuries of colonialism and racial domination. We are, at present, working tirelessly to rebuild that nation ourselves. Perhaps in our own humble way, our nation can thus leave a monument for Africa and the world. And so, Mr. President, we arrive from opposite ends of the continent of Africa at the same conclusion, that Africa must be reborn, that the glory of Carthage must arise again, built by the genius, the devotion, and the dedication of the children of Africa. Okay. Carthage was a colony. Those of you who live in Johannesburg, particularly in the east of Johannesburg, will know the Lebs, the Lebanese. Carthage was a colony of modern-day Lebanon. Of what is Lebanon today? A colony of the biblical towns, biblical cities, biblical states, in fact, city-states. Tyre and Sidon. Tyre and Sidon, you can find them on Google Earth today. Very powerful, dealt with King Solomon, or, very powerful. They are Semitic peoples. So they're half-brothers to the Jews. Anti-Semitism, Semitic. They were called Phoenicians. And the Phoenicians had a colony in Pretoria, in Cape Town, in the Cape, in South Africa. What I'm saying with that absurd statement is that they were no different than you and I are when we are called colonialists, colonizers, what have you. Carthage was never an African city in the sense that Nelson Mandela meant it. Just as I am not an African if what you mean is, am I eligible to play Othello in the play of the same name? Carthage was so removed from its African environment, Maghrebi environment, But even so, the Lebanese, dealing with those Tunisians, cut your hair in Johannesburg. It's mostly Moroccans and Algerians, but they're more than cousins, they're brothers. The Lebanese Phoenicians of Carthage made a discovery that the murex snail possessed a certain dye that could be used for purple. Now, purple was used for the fabrics of the garments of the wealthiest, the highest, the emperors, empresses, the princes, throughout Europe. It was valuable beyond valuable. We've all had that experience of, as kids, having the nativity, the birth of the Son of God, explained to us. Well, they brought gold and frankincense and myrrh because gold was gold. Frankincense sweetened the air at a time when you couldn't, the smell. You couldn't buy, what do you call this stuff? Brute sport, what? Old Spice from a shelf for 15 Rand 99 or whatever it costs. Shield for sportsmen. It was very, very, very valuable. And myrrh, used in the embalming process. I don't know how. I know nothing about myrrh. But apparently something of the greatest significance. Those were the gifts that the three wise men brought to the God made flesh. The only Son of God, begotten, not made. And purple was in that class. The dye of the murex snail. And do you know that up until the time that Carthage was conquered by the Romans, you've heard of the Punic Wars maybe, through hundreds and hundreds of years, the secret never leaked out. The Carthaginians, the Phoenicians, the Lebanese isolated themselves so effectively from the local population. They were such an elitist, apartheid, racist colonizer that unbelievable secret did not get out. They wouldn't allow the locals near it. When they went collecting snails, they ensured that the locals for miles down the beaches, miles and miles and miles, it was apartheid on steroids. For them to have kept that secret for hundreds of years required a level of secrecy, a level of alienation, a level of isolation, of exclusion that apartheid never knew. And here you have this funny man, Nelson Mandela, talking about Carthage as if it was as African could be, and golly gee, those ugly Europeans came and destroyed everything that we made all over again, and now we have to be the best people in the world and make it all right again. As we do. As we always have to do. Oh dear me. And now we have Netflix portraying Cleopatra, or using a black woman to portray Cleopatra. Let me tell you how much nonsense that is. That is competitive to the Othello story and the Carthage story. Cleopatra the Seventh was the last Ptolemaic ruler of Egypt. I think there were about 19 in all, but that's a big guess. That lineage, that dynasty ended around about the time of the birth of Christ. She ruled with her brother, and I can't remember, but there were two. You know, they had incestuous relationships. So there's, in fact, in English, the formal title is brother-husband. And she was from the line, the Ptolemaic line, P-T-O. You don't pronounce the P. Why? I don't know. The Ptolemies ruled Egypt for centuries, and they were Greek. And the Ptolemies did not, this is not disputed, I looked this up to double check my facts, in Encyclopedia Britannica and about 4 other sources. I did a bunch of reading just to make sure that I would not make the mistake of exaggerating, because the argument was powerful enough without having to bull dust my way through it. The argument is conclusive. But all of the liberal arts scholars of this subject, ancient history, concur. They don't go out of their way. They don't have a need to, but they make a point. It's very important. It's very relevant. The Ptolemies never interbred at all. with the Egyptians. Not that the Egyptians are rein en suiwer swart. Whereas the woman in this Netflix series is black. She's black. Not, from the Sahel, like a Tuareg, or from the Sahara, like a Bedouin, or like a Moor, an Algerian from the Maghreb. No, black, sub-Saharan black. Nigerian, Camerooni, whatever is her extraction. Zulu, who knows? But even so, those Egyptians, those Maghrebis, were not allowed into the Ptolemaic lines. Such was the apartheid. The Ptolemies, Alexander the Great of Macedonia if you like, but Alexander of Macedon, who invaded all the way through to India. He conquered all of those places. When he died, he left that empire to two of his generals, Seleucus and Ptolemy. They were Ptolemies. I want to see if I've got something here that I can mention of interest. I beg your pardon. I won't waste too much time. No, I don't find it. Anyway. She was Northern Greek, with blood unsullied by any other blood. Northern Greek, Macedon, Macedonia. End of story. So somebody confronted there's a guy in Egypt suing the director of this Netflix series, who I gather is a black woman, to say, hey, she was Egyptian, she was Maghrebi, from that northernmost portion strip of Africa, not sub-Saharan Africa, not Sahel African, like a Tuareg, not a Saharan African, no, Maghrebi, Egyptian. And her retort is, well, why do you have a problem with a black woman playing that role? As in, why do you have a problem with a black man playing the role of Arsène Lupin or of James Bond? Is that not a true reflection, in the case of James Bond, of somebody from a lower British aristocracy of the early 20th century? No, it's not. Because there were no black aristocrats, none, nil, zero, zip, zat, zilch, in Britain in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, when the stories were set by Ian Fleming. And because a black woman was not who Cleopatra was. Yeah, if you want to take artistic license, okay, do whatever you like, stand on your head. But if you want to represent historical truth, she was not African, as in, am I African enough to play the role of Othello? Your stand, not mine. When you say an African must play Othello, you don't mean a Maghrebi, you don't mean a Bedouin, you don't mean a Tuareg. It's got to be black enough to satisfy political correctness, doesn't it? Otherwise, you would have done it by now. Or no? And I suppose I've made my point. There's no really good reason to go on and on and on about it. But this is the mad world in which we live, in which people's race is redefined to another race, to bolster that race's, self-validation. We'll make Cleopatra black. Not Maghrebi. We will take her from Macedonian, pure underdog Macedonian, to black. Black. The woman who plays her is black. To create this champion. And let me tell you, there are coins from that time with depictions of her, and the depictions are consistent. There wasn't much artistic what. This is not a nice thing to say, but she was an ugly white lady. She on two of the coins she wears Dutch braids, plaited flaxen hair, and you can tell by the, I don't know what's the right word, but relief by the relief of the I don't know anything about sculpting, man, but the raised engraving that they're endeavoring to achieve light and shadow that implies that she was blonde-haired. I don't say she was blonde-haired. I'm saying if you don't like what I'm saying, go and look at the coin. It's conspicuous. Blind man could see it. They're doing with relief, engraved relief, what everybody has ever done. She has a nose that no white woman has ever had, except for Mrs. Rottermeier. The ugliest, pointiest, longest nose you've ever seen. The irony is too rich for words. A chin that, like those depictions of witches, where the nose comes down this far and the chin comes up that far. She was an ugly girl. And 3 or 4 different artists, for the coins, couldn't have made her look that ugly as similarly as the others by accident, or because they were taking poetic license, or they thought, well, we make her ugly. That should keep our heads on our shoulders. The woman was unquestionably ugly, which is fine. I'm not an oil painting myself, but I'm at peace with it. Hopefully you can be at peace with the fact that I'm saying that she was terribly ugly. Ugly in a way that only a white woman could be ugly, because only white people possess those features. You see the Palestinian and Middle Eastern women, some of them are, not beauties, according to their features, their characteristics. You see some Chinese girls, they're not the most attractive woman, shame you, poor thing. But according to your features, Mongoloid features. She was she was ugly as only a white woman could be ugly. Isn't it just too much for your mind? The madness in which we live, in which everything is turned upside down, and then sometimes turned inside out when the upside down doesn't work very well. Thank you for watching this video. God bless you. Cheerio.